They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when the person who nearly spilled your blood carries your family name? What happens when the woman who calls you mom becomes the one who wants you gone? My name is Angela Brooks, though. Most folks call me Angie. And at 73 years old, I never imagined I'd be lying in a hospital bed, staring at ceiling tiles, knowing that my own daughter-in-law tried to kill me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You might think you know how this story ends. You might think, this is just another tale of family drama, another sad story about generational conflict. But let me tell you something. Sometimes the universe has a way of serving justice that's sweeter than any revenge you could ever plan. Sometimes, the very action someone takes to destroy you becomes the rope they use to hang themselves. This isn't just a story about attempted murder. This is a story about greed, about lies, about a woman so consumed with getting what she thought she deserved that she forgot to look where she was stepping. And when she finally fell, she fell harder than she ever pushed me. So settle in, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family, about trust, and about the dangerous lengths people will go to for money they never earned. Let me start from the beginning, because every good story needs context. And honey, this context is everything. I've lived in the same house for 47 years. It's a beautiful colonial on Maple Street, the kind with wraparound porches and mature oak trees that make the whole neighborhood look like something out of a magazine. My late husband Robert and I bought it when our son Michael was just 3 years old. We poured our hearts, our savings, and our dreams into every room, every renovation, every careful improvement over the decades. Robert passed 5 years ago, after a long battle with cancer. Those final months were the hardest of my life, watching the man I'd loved for 51 years slip away piece by piece. But even in his final days, he made me promise something that I've held onto like a lifeline ever since. Angie, he whispered to me one October evening, his hand weak but warm in mine. Promise me you'll keep the house. Promise me you won't let anyone pressure you into giving up our home. Michael's a good boy, but he's not always the strongest when it comes to standing up for what's right. I promised him then, and I meant it. This house isn't just 4 walls and a roof to me. It's where I brought my baby home from the hospital. It's where Michael took his first steps across the hardwood floors that Robert installed himself. It's where we hosted 47 Christmas mornings, countless birthday parties, and where I held my husband's hand during his final breath. But promises, I've learned, become complicated when other people have different plans for your life. Michael met Sarah 3 years ago at some corporate networking event. He was 45 then, recently divorced from his first wife, Jennifer, and honestly, I thought he might never find love again. The divorce had been rough on him, not bitter exactly, but sad in that quiet way that makes a mother's heart ache for her child. Jennifer was a sweet girl, but they'd grown apart over the years. And when they finally called it quits, Michael threw himself into his work as a financial advisor with the kind of intensity that worried me. So when he started talking about Sarah, I was hopeful, genuinely hopeful. He'd light up when he mentioned her name, would spend hours telling me about their dates, their conversations, their shared love of travel and fine dining. Sarah was 38, never married, and worked as a marketing director for some tech startup. She was beautiful in that polished, professional way, always perfectly put together, always saying the right things, always smiling at exactly the right moments. The first time Michael brought her to Sunday dinner, I tried so hard to love her. I really did. I made my famous pot roast, the one that Michael had been begging me to make since he was 12 years old. I set the dining room table with my good china, the spode pattern that Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I even wore my nicest dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that I usually saved for church. Sarah walked into my home that evening like she was inspecting it for purchase. Her eyes swept over everything: the family photos on the mantel, the antique furniture that had been passed down through my family, the carefully maintained hardwood floors, the crown molding that Robert had spent 3 weekends installing. She smiled and said all the right things, complimented the roast, admired the china, but there was something calculating in her gaze that made me uncomfortable. "What a lovely home, Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It must be worth quite a lot in today's market." The comment struck me as odd. Who discusses property values at a first dinner? But Michael was beaming, so proud to be showing off both his mother and his girlfriend, and I pushed my discomfort aside. Maybe she was just making conversation. Maybe I was being overly sensitive, reading too much into innocent small talk. Over the following months, as Michael and Sarah's relationship grew more serious, I tried to build a connection with her. I really did. I invited her to go shopping with me, suggested we get our nails done together, offered to teach her some of my family recipes. But Sarah always had an excuse. She was too busy with work, had plans with her friends, wasn't really interested in cooking. The distance between us might have remained just that. Distance, if not for what happened 18 months ago. Michael proposed to Sarah on Valentine's Day in what I had to admit was a beautifully romantic gesture. He took her to the same restaurant where Robert had proposed to me all those years ago, got down on one knee right there by the piano, and presented her with his grandmother's engagement ring, the one that had been in our family for 3 generations. I was happy for them. Truly, I was. Despite my reservations about Sarah, I wanted my son to be happy, and he was clearly head over heels in love. We started planning an engagement party, and that's when things began to change in ways I couldn't have predicted. "Mom," Michael said to me one evening in March, about a month after the proposal. He'd come over for dinner, something he'd been doing less frequently since Sarah entered his life. "Sarah and I have been talking about our future, about our plans after we get married." I was loading the dishwasher, my back to him, but something in his tone made me pause. There was a hesitancy there, an uncertainty that I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign from his childhood. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, turning to face him. "I'm so happy you two are building a life together." He cleared his throat, a nervous habit he'd never outgrown. "The thing is, Mom, we've been looking at houses, and the market is just so expensive right now, Sarah thinks. Well, we both think it might make sense for us to move in here. With you." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because the idea was necessarily unreasonable. The house was certainly big enough, but because of the way he'd presented it. Not as a question, not as a request, but as a decision they'd already made. "Move in here?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "All 3 of us, you mean?" "Just temporarily," he said quickly, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Until we can save up enough for a down payment on something really nice. Sarah has some ideas about how we could update the place, maybe make it work better for all of us." That phrase, "make it work better for all of us," sent a chill down my spine. This was my home. The home I'd shared with Robert for almost 5 decades. The home where I felt closest to his memory, where every room held decades of carefully preserved moments. "What kind of updates?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Michael finally looked at me then, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him knew what he was asking wasn't fair, but another part, the part that was clearly being influenced by Sarah, had already convinced him it was reasonable. "Nothing major," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe modernize the kitchen, update some of the bathrooms. Sarah thinks the master bedroom could be expanded into the guest room next to it. You know, to give us more space as a married couple." The guest room he was talking about had been Robert's study. It was where he'd worked on his carpentry projects, where he'd kept his tools and his books, where I still went sometimes just to sit in his chair and feel close to him. The idea of tearing down that wall, of erasing that space, felt like someone was asking me to erase Robert himself. I see, I said carefully. And where exactly would I fit into these plans? Well, that's the thing, Michael said, and his discomfort was becoming more obvious by the minute. Sarah suggested that maybe it would be better for everyone if you considered downsizing. There are some really nice senior living communities in the area, Mom. Places where you could have your own space but also have help if you need it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Support systems, activities, people your own age. The betrayal cut deeper than I can adequately describe. My own son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through his divorce and his struggles, was essentially asking me to give up my home so he and his fiancée could have it. Senior living, I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. You mean you want me to move into a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, Mom. These are independent living facilities. Really nice ones. You'd have your own apartment, your own kitchen if you wanted to cook, but you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house anymore. The rational part of my brain understood that he was trying to frame this as being for my benefit. But the emotional part of me, the part that felt like I was being pushed out of my own life, was screaming in protest. This big house, I said slowly, is my home, Michael. It's where your father and I built our life together. It's where you grew up. It's where I want to spend the rest of my days. But Mom, be realistic. You're 73 years old. What happens if you fall? What happens if you have a medical emergency and there's no one here to help you? At least in a senior community, there would be people around, medical staff on site. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized that somewhere along the way, Sarah had convinced him that I was a burden, that my presence in my own home was an inconvenience that needed to be managed rather than a life that deserved respect. I'm not ready to give up my independence, Michael, I said firmly. And I'm not ready to give up this house. Your father made me promise to keep it, and I intend to honor that promise. Something shifted in Michael's expression then. The pleading, uncertain look was replaced by something harder, more determined. It was a look I'd seen before, usually, when he was about to do something he knew was wrong, but had already convinced himself was necessary. Mom, I know this is hard, but you have to think about what's practical. Sarah and I are going to be married. We need space to start our family. And honestly, with your arthritis getting worse and your blood pressure issues, it's not safe for you to be living alone in a house this size. The mention of my health issues felt like a low blow. Yes, I had arthritis. Yes, I took medication for my blood pressure, but I was hardly an invalid. I drove myself to the grocery store, maintained my garden, cooked my own meals, and lived a perfectly independent life. The suggestion that I was somehow incapacitated felt both insulting and manipulative. I'm managing just fine, thank you, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. And I don't recall asking for your advice about my living situation. You don't have to ask, Mom. I'm your son. It's my job to look out for you. Your job, I said, is to respect me, and right now, you're not doing that. We stared at each other across my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd made him countless meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd comforted him through heartbreaks and celebrated his achievements. The distance between us felt wider than the few feet of hardwood floor. I'm going to marry Sarah, Mom, he said finally, with or without your blessing, and we're going to need a place to live. I was hoping we could work something out that would benefit everyone, but if you're going to be stubborn about this, we'll just have to find another solution. The threat was implicit but clear. If I didn't cooperate with their plans, I'd be cut out of their lives. My son was essentially holding our relationship hostage to get what he wanted. I see, I said quietly. And what does Sarah think about all this? Sarah thinks you're a wonderful woman, he said, but the words sounded rehearsed. She just wants what's best for everyone. She wants us to be a family. A family. The word should have warmed my heart, but instead, it felt like a cold stone in my chest. Because the family Sarah wanted clearly didn't include me. At least not in any meaningful way. After Michael left that night, I sat in Robert's old chair in what had been his study and tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had my relationship with my son deteriorated so quickly? How had a woman I barely knew managed to convince him that his own mother was a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved? I called my sister Helen, who lives in Florida, with her husband. Helen is 2 years younger than me and has always been my voice of reason, the person I turn to when the world stops making sense. He said, "What?" Helen's voice was sharp with indignation when I told her about the conversation. "He wants me to move into senior living so he and Sarah can have the house," I repeated, the words no less painful the second time around. "Angela, Marie Brooks, you listen to me," Helen said, using my full name the way she had when we were children, and she was trying to make a point. "That house is yours. You and Robert worked your whole lives to pay for it, to make it a home. No one, not even your son, has the right to push you out of it." "But what if he's right?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me. "What if I am being stubborn? What if something happens to me and I can't take care of myself?" "Then you'll deal with it when it happens," Helen said firmly. "But you don't give up your life because of what might happen someday. And you certainly don't give it up to make room for some woman who's clearly got her eye on your property value." Helen's words were comforting, but they didn't solve my problem. Over the following weeks, the tension between Michael and me grew worse. He'd call less frequently, and when he did, our conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. Sarah, who had never been particularly warm toward me, became even more distant. Then came the wedding planning, and with it, a new set of challenges I hadn't anticipated. "We want to have the reception here," Sarah announced one afternoon in May. She'd come over with Michael to discuss wedding details, though it was clear the decisions had already been made. "The backyard is perfect for a tent, and it would be so much more intimate than a hotel ballroom." I looked out at the backyard that Robert and I had spent 30 years cultivating. The rose garden, the mature trees, the carefully maintained lawn. It was beautiful, certainly, but it was also my private sanctuary, the place where I felt most connected to the memories of my life with Robert. "How many guests are you thinking?" I asked, trying to be reasonable. "About 150, Sarah said casually, as if she were discussing a small dinner party. 150 people, in my backyard, trampling through my garden, using my bathrooms, tracking through my house. The thought made me feel sick. "That's quite a few people," I said carefully. "Are you sure the space is adequate?" "Oh, we've already had an event planner come look at it," Sarah said brightly. "She thinks it's perfect. We'd need to do some landscaping, of course. Move some of those rose bushes. Maybe take down a couple of the older trees to make room for the tent. But it's going to be absolutely gorgeous. Move my rose bushes, take down my trees." The casual way she discussed dismantling my garden felt like she was planning to rearrange furniture in her own home, rather than proposing to destroy something that had taken decades to create. "Those roses were planted by my husband," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Some of them have been there for 20 years. "I know, and they're beautiful," Sarah said with that practiced smile. "But think about how lovely it will be to have new landscaping. More modern, more streamlined. After the wedding, you'll have a whole new garden to enjoy. A new garden that I hadn't chosen, hadn't planned, hadn't wanted. A garden that would hold no memories of Robert, no connection to the life we'd built together. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with such extensive changes," I said. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, and for just a moment I saw something flash in her eyes that looked like annoyance, maybe even anger. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Of course, it's your decision," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just thought you'd want Michael's wedding to be perfect. I thought you'd want to do everything possible to make it special for him." There it was, the guilt trip. The suggestion that if I didn't agree to let them destroy my garden, I was somehow failing as a mother. It was manipulative and unfair, and it worked exactly as Sarah had intended. "Of course I want Michael's wedding to be perfect," I said, feeling trapped. "I just need some time to think about it." "Sure," Sarah said, but her voice had gone cold. "Take all the time you need. We'll just have to make other arrangements if this doesn't work out." After they left, I walked through my garden with tears in my eyes. Every plant, every tree, every carefully tended flower bed represented years of Robert's and my shared labor and love. The idea of watching strangers tear it apart felt like watching them tear apart my heart. But I also knew that if I said no, I'd be painted as the difficult mother-in-law, the selfish old woman who put her flowers before her son's happiness. Sarah had positioned the request in a way that made any refusal seem cruel and unreasonable. That's when I began to understand that this wasn't really about the wedding at all. It was about power. It was about establishing who would make the decisions in what was still legally my home. It was about Sarah testing my boundaries to see how far she could push me. And I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. The wedding planning continued through the summer, and with each passing week, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own life. Sarah had opinions about everything: the flowers, my roses weren't sophisticated enough; the catering, we needed to upgrade the kitchen appliances to handle the event; the guest bathroom, it needed to be completely renovated before the wedding. Each suggestion came with the same underlying message. This house wasn't good enough as it was. I wasn't good enough as I was. Everything needed to be changed, updated, improved to meet Sarah's standards. Michael, for his part, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. He was caught up in the romance of planning his wedding, excited about his future with Sarah, and either couldn't see or chose to ignore how his fiancée was systematically undermining his relationship with his mother. The breaking point came in August, just 2 months before the wedding. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Sarah let herself in through the back door. She'd never asked for a key, but somehow she'd gotten one, and she'd taken to coming and going as if she already lived there. "Angela, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying a tone of authority that immediately put me on edge. I turned from the stove where I was stirring soup. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" Sarah sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had eaten thousands of meals, where Michael had done his homework, where we'd played cards and shared stories and built a lifetime of memories. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the future," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "About what's going to happen after Michael and I are married." "I'm listening," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to be careful. "The truth is, Angela, this arrangement isn't working. Michael is torn between his loyalty to you and his commitment to our marriage. It's putting a strain on our relationship, and frankly, it's not fair to any of us." I turned off the burner and faced her fully. "What arrangement would that be? You living here, in this house that's far too big for one person. Michael spends half his time worrying about you, wondering if you're safe, if you're lonely, if you're managing okay on your own. It's not healthy for him, and it's not healthy for you either." The way she said it made it sound like she was doing me a favor, like she was the voice of reason in an unreasonable situation. "I manage just fine," I said quietly. "Do you?" Sarah's voice was sharp now, the pretense of concern dropping away. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're clinging to a house and a lifestyle that you can't really maintain anymore. And it's affecting everyone around you." I felt my cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. This is my home, Sarah. I've lived here for 47 years. I raised my son here. I'm not ready to give that up. Ready or not, it's time, she said, leaning forward. Michael deserves to start his marriage without having to worry about his mother's stubborn refusal to face reality. And honestly, Angela, you deserve better than rattling around in this big, empty house, holding on to the past. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. She was talking about my life, my memories, my connection to Robert, as if they were nothing more than inconvenient obstacles to her plans. What exactly is it that you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled then, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally decided to stop pretending. I want you to sell this house, she said simply. Michael and I have found a lovely senior community about 20 minutes from here. You can take the proceeds from the sale and buy yourself a nice apartment. Maybe have some money left over for travel or hobbies or whatever it is you want to do with your remaining years. And what happens to this house? Michael and I buy it from you, at a fair price, of course. Below market value considering the family connection, but fair. You get to downsize to something more manageable. We get to start our marriage in a real home instead of cramped apartments or rentals, and everyone wins. Below market value. The phrase hit me like a slap. She wanted me to sell my home, the home Robert and I had paid for, the home that was worth significantly more than we'd originally paid thanks to decades of improvements and a strong real estate market, for less than it was worth so that she and Michael could profit from my sacrifice. I see, I said slowly. And if I refuse? Sarah's mask slipped entirely then, and I saw the cold calculation that had been hiding behind her smiles and concerned words. Then Michael will have to choose, she said, between his mother who won't let him live his own life and the woman he loves who's trying to build a future with him. And honestly, Angela, I don't think that's a choice you want to force him to make. The threat was clear and brutal. Agree to sell my house or lose my son forever. I stared at this woman who had inserted herself into my life, who had systematically worked to isolate me from my own child, who was now demanding that I give up everything I held dear so she could have what she wanted. I need time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Sarah said, standing up. But don't take too long. Michael and I would like to have this settled before the wedding. It would be such a shame if family drama had to overshadow what should be the happiest day of our lives. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. I cried for Robert, who wasn't there to help me navigate this impossible situation. I cried for Michael, who had somehow become a stranger, willing to sacrifice his mother for a woman who clearly had no love for me. I cried for myself, facing the possibility of losing everything I cared about. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something else began to grow alongside my grief. Anger, determination, a stubborn refusal to be pushed out of my own life by someone who had no right to demand such a thing. Sarah had underestimated me. She'd assumed that because I was older, because I was alone, because I loved my son, I would be easily manipulated into giving her what she wanted. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I called my lawyer, James Patterson, who had handled Robert's estate and had been our family attorney for over 20 years. Angela, what a pleasant surprise, he said when his secretary put me through. How are you holding up? I've been better, Jim, I said. I need to ask you some questions about my house, about my rights, and about what would happen if someone tried to force me to sell. There was a pause. Is someone trying to force you to sell your house? I told him everything. About Michael and Sarah's demands, about the pressure to move into senior living, about Sarah's ultimatum the night before. Jim listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Angela, he said finally, I want you to listen to me very carefully. That house is yours. You own it free and clear. No one, not your son, not his fiancée, not anyone, can force you to sell it. And anyone who tries to coerce you into selling could potentially be charged with elder abuse. Elder abuse? The term shocked me. Financial exploitation of elderly people is a serious crime, Jim explained. And what you're describing, the pressure tactics, the threats to cut off contact with your son, the attempts to convince you that you're incapable of living independently, those are all red flags for potential abuse. The conversation with Jim gave me strength, but it also made me realize how precarious my situation really was. Sarah wasn't just greedy, she was potentially dangerous. And my son, whether through manipulation or genuine belief, had become her ally rather than my protector. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Michael would call and casually mention how much he was looking forward to starting fresh after the wedding. Sarah would drop by with real estate listings for senior communities, always with that bright smile and concerned voice. The message was clear. The decision had been made, and I was expected to comply. But I had made a decision too. I wasn't leaving my home. I wasn't giving up the life Robert and I had built. And I wasn't going to let fear of losing Michael prevent me from standing up for myself. What I didn't realize was that Sarah had made a decision as well, and her decision was far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The night everything changed was October 15th. I remember the date because it was Robert's birthday, and I'd spent the day at his grave, bringing him flowers and telling him about what was happening with Michael and Sarah. It sounds foolish. Maybe talking to a headstone, but it brought me comfort to share my troubles with him, even if he couldn't answer. I came home that evening feeling drained and sad. The house felt particularly empty, and I found myself missing Robert with an intensity that surprised me. 5 years after his death, I'd thought I'd learned to live with the grief, but sometimes it still hit me like a physical blow. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard Sarah's key in the back door. My heart sank. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation, especially on Robert's birthday. "Angela, we need to finish our conversation," she said without preamble, not even bothering to say hello. I turned to face her, noting that she looked different somehow. More agitated than usual, less controlled. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was something manic in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "I told you I needed time to think," I said calmly. "You've had 3 weeks," she snapped. "Time's up. Michael and I need an answer, and we need it tonight. And if I say no?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're not going to say no, Angela, because you're going to listen to what I have to say, and then you're going to realize that you don't have a choice anymore." Something in her tone made me step back instinctively. This wasn't the controlled, manipulative Sarah I'd grown accustomed to. This was someone on the edge, someone who had lost patience with subtle tactics. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "I mean that I know about your little conversation with your lawyer," she said, and my blood ran cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Michael tells me everything, Angela. Everything. Including the fact that you're trying to find ways to fight us on this. How did she know about Jim? Had Michael been monitoring my phone calls? Had she?" "I have every right to consult with my attorney," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "About elder abuse?" Sarah's voice was mocking. "About financial exploitation?" "Really, Angela, that's quite an accusation to make against your own son." The realization hit me like a truck. Michael had told her everything I'd shared with him in confidence. Every doubt, every fear, every conversation with my lawyer. My own son had betrayed my trust completely. "Michael wouldn't," I started to say. "Michael would do anything for me," Sarah interrupted. "Anything, including things that might hurt you if you don't start cooperating." What do you mean by that? Sarah smiled, and for the first time, I was genuinely afraid of her. I mean that accidents happen, Angela. Especially to elderly people living alone in big houses. Especially to elderly people who are becoming increasingly isolated from their families because of their stubborn, unreasonable behavior. The threat was unmistakable, and I felt my knees go weak. She was talking about hurting me, maybe even killing me. You're talking about murder, I whispered. I'm talking about unfortunate accidents that happen to difficult old women who won't listen to reason, she said casually. Falls downstairs, kitchen fires, medical emergencies that go unnoticed for hours because no one checks on them anymore. I backed toward the phone, thinking I could call 911, call Jim, call someone who could help me. But Sarah was younger, faster, and she stepped between me and the phone. Now, she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that was more terrifying than her threats. No need to involve anyone else in our family discussion. This is between you and me, Angela. Between the woman who's been living in the past and the woman who's planning for the future. Michael would never... I tried again. Michael will never know, she said simply. He'll be devastated, of course. His poor mother, living alone in that big house, finally having the accident that everyone saw coming. He'll probably blame himself for not insisting that you move somewhere safer sooner. The calculation behind her words was breathtaking. She'd already planned it all out. Already figured out how to make my death look accidental, how to manipulate Michael's grief to serve her purposes. But it doesn't have to come to that, she continued, her voice becoming reasonable again. Almost. Kind. All you have to do is agree to sell the house. We can have the papers drawn up tomorrow. You can be moved into a nice apartment by the end of the month. Everyone lives happily ever after. I stared at her. This woman who had smiled at my dinner table, who had worn my grandmother's ring, who was planning to marry my son. And I realized that I was looking at someone genuinely evil, someone who would kill me without hesitation if I didn't give her what she wanted. But I also realized something else. Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She'd revealed her true nature too soon, shown her hand before she'd secured her victory. And that gave me something I hadn't had before. Knowledge of exactly who I was dealing with. I need to sit down, I said, letting my voice shake, playing up the frightened old woman persona she expected. This is a lot to process. Of course, she said, her voice softening as she sensed victory. Take your time, but remember, Angela, I'm not a patient person, and I'm not going to let you stand in the way of my future with Michael. I moved toward the kitchen chair, my mind racing. I needed to get her to leave, needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to protect myself from someone who was clearly willing to commit murder to get what she wanted. But as I reached for the chair, my foot caught on the edge of the rug. That had been slightly askew since Sarah had entered. I stumbled, reached out to steady myself, and that's when Sarah made her choice. Instead of helping me, instead of stepping back to give me room to recover my balance, she stepped forward and gave me a hard shove toward the staircase that led from the kitchen to the second floor. Whoops, she said, but her voice was cold. Calculating. Careful there, Angela. These old houses can be so dangerous. I fell backward, my hands reaching desperately for the railing, my mind screaming that this was it. This was how I was going to die. The stairs rushed up to meet me, and the last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of Sarah's laughter, high and bright and utterly without remorse. But I didn't die. And that, as it turned out, was Sarah's first and most critical mistake. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. When I opened my eyes, the world was a blur of white ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights that seemed to pierce straight through my skull. The antiseptic smell of the hospital filled my nostrils, and every part of my body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. My left arm was in a cast, my ribs screamed with every breath, and there was a bandage wrapped around my head that made it difficult to turn my neck. But I was alive. Against all odds, despite Sarah's murderous intentions, I was alive. The first face I saw was Michael's, hovering over me with an expression of concern that might have warmed my heart under different circumstances. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair disheveled, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him. "Mom, oh God, Mom, you're awake," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctors weren't sure. You've been unconscious for 2 days. We were so scared." 2 days. I'd lost 2 days of my life to Sarah's violence, 2 days during which she'd probably been playing the role of the concerned future daughter-in-law, probably weaving whatever story she'd concocted to explain my accident. "What happened?" I whispered, my throat feeling like sandpaper. I needed to hear her version, needed to understand what lies she'd already told